Welcome to the SNN Network Canada virtual event. I'm your host, Robert Kraft, and I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our next panel, the Life Sciences and Healthcare panel. This panel will be moderated by Tina Byers, Vice President of Investment Banking at Roth Canada ULC. With that, Tina, take it away.
The information in this webinar is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal or specific circumstances. Therefore, it's not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision. I'm the moderator of this panel and in no way providing security advice or recommending any public companies featured on the panel or discussed during the panel. For disclosure of potential conflict of interest, I do own shares in Medexus Pharmaceuticals, and Roth Canada ULC's US affiliate Roth Capital Partners LLC does cover the company with equity research. Roth Canada ULC is a member of IROC and CIPF. Thanks, Bobby. I'm looking forward to this discussion. Welcome everyone to today's panel. Healthcare and biotech stocks in particular tend to be inherently binary, where one major catalyst can make or break a company, and we've seen this multiple times in the Canadian space in particular. The discussion of today's panel will be around how companies can mitigate the risks that we often see associated with healthcare and biotech companies while still creating significant upside potential for investors. So today on the panel, we have Cameron Groome, who's the CEO of Microbix Biosystems, Ken d'Entremont, the CEO of Medexus Pharmaceuticals, Doug Janzen, Chairman and CEO of Aequus Pharmaceuticals, and Mark Williams, President and Chief Scientific Officer of Marvel Biotechnology. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Excited to get this conversation going. Before we get into some of the Q&A, I'll give everyone an opportunity to do a brief overview of their business model. So Doug, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about Aequus.
Sure. Aequus is an eye care focused company. We have a mix of prescription products for glaucoma and non-prescription over-the-counter products for dry eye disease. And being focused on the Canadian side of that market for the last number of years. So we have great relationships across optometry, ophthalmology, and we're just now starting on a bit of a journey of working on a development program for a rare genetic disorder called Stargardt's disease that leads to blindness in kids. So for that program, we have North American rights to that orphan indication. Compounded annual growth rate of about 45% from a revenue perspective over the last 5 years. We launched 2 new products last year, and we have additional products to add to the bag here. Probably one more deal before year end, and then certainly into the new year. So we see revenues continuing to grow. The business is pretty well break even at our current revenue run rate. Clearly, as we make investments in the Stargardt program, that'll change the break even point a little bit, but we're confident we can continue growing revenue both off of our base products and new products that we're negotiating here over the coming year.
That's great, thanks. And Cameron, I know you've had some significant revenue growth this year as well. So why don't you tell us a bit about your business?
Thank you, Tina. Happy to do so. Microbix Biosystems, MBX on the TSX and MBXF on the OTCQX in the US. We're very much an operating business. We're involved in broadly in the infectious disease diagnostics industry, and we generate sales of in the $18-19 million range for the fiscal year just ended, up close to 80% year over year. And this is that we're very much an operating business. We have 3 sales generating product lines in test ingredients, test quality controls to help ensure accuracy, and also producing medical devices for sample collection, viral transport medium. So a very broad product line, over 100 different products that we sell to over 100 different customers around the world. So very much not a binary business, although I do have experience running those as well, but our risk is inherently mitigated by the connectivity we have very broadly within the diagnostics industry, and we're generating about a 20% net margin. So we are profitable and cash flow positive.
Great. Ken, you've got a diversified product portfolio as well. Tell us a bit about the products that are in the market and what you're working on.
Sure. Yeah, we've got about $80 million worth of current revenue, US dollars, from 2 operations in the US and Canada. So that base of business is growing from about $10 million a few years ago to over 80 million. And we've got a product that's in registration phase in the US called treosulfan that could more than double that revenue. So, when we speak to the topic at hand today, we've got 2 strategies to try and mitigate some of that risk. One is having a strong base business, and then 2, looking for products we feel certain we can get registered.
Great. And last but not least, Mark, tell us a little bit about MRVL.
I'm a bit of the odd one out here by being a pre-revenue company by the sound of it. But nonetheless, we use a drug redevelopment model is what we like to refer to it as, where we start off with a known drug and then make logical chemical changes to it. So we know the safety, the efficacy, the history of the drug, the toxicology, and we build on that science to find new uses for the original drug into new diseases. So we really expand on the original drug. But by making a chemical change, we now have composition of matter patents, and we move very quickly from preclinical testing into clinical trials. And in our case, we're less than a year out, probably around 9 months out from clinical trials for our molecule. And we're also hoping to show efficacy in our early stage phase 1 clinical trial. So we really quickly build value in the compound going forward. For us as well, our drugs have multiple applications potentially. So in that sense, we've de-risked the one-trick pony aspect of the drug. It can potentially be used for neurological and non-neurological diseases. And then finally, we've also tried to de-risk our company by having a second asset. So we're not just all focused on one asset. And again, our second asset is actually involving redeveloping a psychedelic to a non-psychedelic molecule, but still retains the antidepressive activity and the potential anti-addictive activities that's been associated with that class of drugs.
Great. Well, thanks for the intros. Before we get too much into the topic here, I wanted to take a step back and just talk about the market outlook. The biotech and healthcare space started off with a bang this year, but has slowed down and weakened a little bit and underperformed in the last little while. Doug, what are you seeing in terms of appetite for the space right now?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. There was a lot of attention on the space in the first part of the year. From a Canadian context, there was some massive successes. Think of Accelera, Precision Nanosystem acquisition. The progress that Xenon's made. It's been the start of the year was certainly, there was a lot of attention on biotech in general globally. I think for most of us panelists on the call today, we're in that kind of mid-cap to small cap bucket. And in the Canadian context, it's always steady, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's been overly strong this calendar year. It's been a pretty steady year is the way I would describe it. A number of companies have made decent progress and are getting rewarded for that. But it's been a while since we had a really, outside of the first quarter, it's been a while since the biotech market has been, really front and center in the Canadian context.
Yeah, we've certainly had a lot of activity, particularly around the COVID space. And I know Cameron's been a beneficiary of that, although it's not his only aspect to the business. But Cameron, maybe you can give some color on what you've been seeing as well.
Sure. Tina, you're quite right. As a virology company, we've been doing quite a bit to help public health across Canada in the response for the COVID pandemic. But the very breadth of our portfolio has meant it's been a mixed blessing for us. In some cases, people haven't been visiting the doctor and getting regularly scheduled medical tests. So it's depressed some elements of the business as it's moved others forward. But I think it really depends on what nature biotechnology companies you're looking at. The ones Doug cited, for example, that are involved in breakthrough therapeutic elements, and that's certainly that going down that binary trend where a big win or the failure of a potential big win have a large impact on companies. There are other companies like Microbix, for example, that are much broader based, and we see more incremental gains and continued steadier growth as a result of that. So I think from an investor point of view, it really comes down to what are you looking for? Are you looking for that higher risk gamble, or are you looking for a more secure portfolio asset? And if you are looking for the higher risk gambles, I think you've got to own multiple names in that subset of space versus a smaller number of companies that are going to execute more consistently and maybe are more revenue driven.
Well, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to have this topic discussion, because all of these companies have some sort of downside protection in a challenging market, but there's also certain aspects to the businesses, each of these businesses, that offer significant upside as well. So when you're an investor who's maybe concerned about this binary outcome, it's helpful to see in a challenging market, you've got commercial revenue, or we've de-risked this biotechnology company through the data we've gathered through other approvals outside of Canada, or other historical data by, like Mark, for example, repurposing drugs for different indications. And Ken, maybe you can touch on the M&A in the space that you're seeing as well. There's still some activity going on in M&A, and we saw that with the recent acquisition from Sanofi.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of activity in M&A. I mean, obviously, everyone's looking to build scale, including Medexus. I mean, we feel that, by having stronger revenue, a broader portfolio, achieving greater scale, you get better valuations, and you do protect that downside. So, we've been very active. Did a transaction just over a year ago. Did another one with the treosulfan earlier this year, and so there's lots of opportunity out there. And for us, I mean, that's how you mitigate the risk. You spread your revenue over a broader base of sales in 2 territories, and then try and grow it as aggressively as possible. And so that's what we're really looking to do. So we're pleased that the M&A activity has been hot of late.
Yeah, and you talked about product diversification. Why don't you talk about maybe treosulfan in a bit more detail in terms of market size and what that upside opportunity looks like?
Sure. We're a rare disease orphan drug type company in both US and Canada. So, we've got infrastructure built out in transplant and in oncology in general. So, treosulfan is a perfect fit for us. It is a drug targeting stem cell transplantation, conditioning prior to the transplant. And so for us, it fits right into an infrastructure that largely exists. So, our ratio of SG&A to net revenue improves as we add these products. And so, treosulfan, is $100 million plus opportunity in the US. We've already launched it in Canada. We're waiting for registration in the US. And, at that stage, then we have the potential to more than double our revenues, which I think is the other side of this equation. We're talking about, de-risking investments. That's one side of the equation, but you also want to have good growth opportunities. That's what investors are looking for. And clearly, that's what we're trying to do at Medexus, where we have a very strong base of business, which generates positive EBITDA. But then we also have an asset which can more than double our revenue. So, we think that we do offer both to investors, which should make us an attractive investment, as we grow.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, Doug, you kind of have a similar business model. You're looking at multiple products, different stages of development, but really trying to bring them or well-researched or well-studied products into Canada. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so our commercial operations currently are focused in Canada. And we have 4 products on the market, 1 in transplant and the rest are in optometry and ophthalmology, mix of both over the counter and prescription. And we expect it to kind of double the number of products that we are commercializing over the calendar 2022. We see, Canada's a smallish market, so it gets overlooked a lot of times by big pharma. Paying and reimbursement is I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but it never leaves you overly happy. You're always kind of pushing things uphill with payers, and we've been able to carve out a really nice niche in the eye care space, and we've been taking market share from massive global companies like Alcon and Allergan and folks like that, mostly based around the amount of attention and effort we can put into a product that's material to us and our investors, but wouldn't necessarily be material to a multi-$100 billion global business like most of our competitors are.
And that business model as well, I think, is interesting. If you look at biotech companies or taking a drug from preclinical to at market or in the market, the success rate is, I think, 0.02% or something like that. So you're eliminating a lot of risk.
That's correct. Like we've, in past lives, we've gotten drugs approved and, lost our hair in doing it. Like it's a stressful, it does take.
Noticed.
It takes 10 years and $1 billion to get a drug approved. So we're more focused now on, we're willing to take commercial risk, but not, historically we haven't been taking a lot of development risk, and that's going to change as we move forward with this orphan product in the US for Stargardt syndrome.
And Mark, maybe you can touch on that too, because obviously repurposing drugs, you're removing a lot of that developmental risk, and you have a lot of data on safety and even some efficacy data as well, as from what I understand.
Yeah, ours is a little more nuanced than that, in that we are creating a brand new drug, but we're using all of the data that the previous drug has accumulated to direct us what to do with the drug, how to make those chemical changes and so forth, so that we can now go into new areas. I mean, for us as a nanocap type company, I mean, we're forced to be more capital efficient. So for example, for us, the cost to get a drug from identification into the phase 1 clinic is about, say, $2 to $2.5 million, which is historically a very, very aggressive rate that would be needed to get that compound through those preclinical testing and manufacturing. And we're also trying to look beyond what the future trends are beyond COVID. This will end at some point, and we see diseases of aging as the big issue facing certainly Western societies. So things like Alzheimer's, where it's a silent epidemic. About 1 in 3 people over the age of 75, 80 has dementia of some form or other. I worry that we're going to see armies of caregivers being needed. So we're trying to position ourselves to be in those kind of markets. And we also benefited from the Biogen approval in some extent with their antibody in the Alzheimer's space. That really, I think it's kickstarted some real interest in the space again. So we benefit from that particular segment of the biotech market. So yeah, our goal is to be capital efficient, get into a position where we hope to be able to develop enough information and clinical information on our asset that will attract a larger pharma for either a partnership, licensing deal, acquisition, or failing that, maybe even try and uplist into the US, where you can certainly justify very good valuations as well, and attract a whole new set of investors on their markets.
Yeah, it's interesting what you were saying about just finding a business with a long-term focus, right? The markets are volatile. You want to focus on businesses that are there for the long term, and obviously Alzheimer's, unfortunately, is not going away anytime soon. I don't know if Cameron will agree that COVID is going away anytime soon, but maybe you can touch on the sustainability of your business, Cameron.
Sure. I think I'd build on some of the points that all three panelists have made, Tina, about breadth of business has an impact on the sustainability of it. If you're only in one channel or one product area, that's a much narrower scope and more vulnerable to twists and turns. Certainly our business is transforming already, envisioning COVID moving from pandemic to endemic, and we're incredibly well positioned for what promises to be a golden age of diagnostics, where all the additional capacity built out to respond to the pandemic gets intelligently redeployed into better medicine, whether that involves multiplex testing, so testing one sample for multiple infections at the same time, whether that involves simultaneously diagnosing a bacterial infection and evaluating what antibiotics will effectively treat it. All that work is now ongoing already with global diagnostics companies with whom we're collaborating. So we're very well positioned to benefit regardless of how long it takes for COVID to go from pandemic to endemic. From an investor point of view, I think breadth within a company benefits that. And Mark was mentioning multiple lead and backup compounds and programs, as were Doug and Ken referring to that portfolio. The other thing that impacts companies is scale, as Ken was indicating about. Greater scale means perhaps a better valuation, and the company can operate longer, perhaps before it gets taken out. We're facing a bit of that ourselves with, very low forward price earnings multiple on our shares presently, and looking, will we achieve scale fast enough not to be a certain target? But all of these things are good. It comes down to the investor know what you're investing in and why you're investing in the company.
Yeah, that's an important point that I'd like to touch on as well, is just in terms of scalability. Ken, why don't you talk about how Medexus is thinking about new products that they're bringing in, and how they're using economies of scale to benefit the business?
Yeah, happy to do that. Just want to reinforce Cameron's point that he just made, though, that the Canadian companies typically are getting undervalued. So there does seem to be a lot of attraction from US-based companies recognizing the low multiples that some of our companies are trading at. So certainly there is a trend there. With respect to leveraging our infrastructure, clearly that is something that we think is really important. And that's why, we try to have focus within a specific therapeutic area so we can use the infrastructure that's been built in both US and Canada. We're licensing or acquiring drugs that can use the sales force and the people that we've got in our organizations, the simplest way to put it. Perfect example is Ixinity, the hemophilia B drug that we acquired last year, about 30 million in net revenue. It took our ratio of SG&A to revenue from 65% down to 45%. And that's simply because we hired only a few additional people in order to acquire and execute on that drug. So obviously that leverage is highly accretive. A lot of that falls to the bottom line with a strong gross margin product, where our average gross margin is in the 60 to 65% range. So obviously that is the business model that we are trying to execute. And so every time we're out there doing licensing and M&A, we're looking for assets that can leverage infrastructure we already have in place in both US and Canada.
And Doug, how are you thinking about that as well? I think you've been looking at some orphan or potential orphan products to bring into your portfolio. How does scalability affect the way that you think about product licensing deals and acquisitions?
Yeah, I think my answer would be really similar to Ken's. We have a focus in eye care, both prescription and over the counter. Our sales reps are in front of clinicians. There's 24 calls a day if they're all doing their jobs right, every single day. And eye care, people, patients, customers, everyone's really sensitive to the health and effectiveness of their vision. And we see a lot of opportunity to continue to grow in that space and build off the expertise and the infrastructure that we already have there. The other part of our business, and again, this is probably similar for Ken, if you're a specialist in transplant in Canada, or you're a specialist in ophthalmology, you go to the same conferences, you read the same papers as someone in London or New York or LA. And we use our clinicians, like most of our business development ideas come from our clinicians. They identify a product that is available elsewhere and they wonder, why don't we have it here in Canada? Or they identify a product that they're interested in that's available in the US or Europe. And it's usually where the bulk of our BD kind of ideas come from. It comes from our actual customers. And we're in daily contact with them, not just detailing our products, but asking those key opinion leaders, what are you seeing in the marketplace, and where do you see need and opportunity? And it's been really effective for us.
That's great. And I guess on the other side of the equation, I have a question for Mark. You're looking for a partner right now on your products. So having this data for other indications, does that make it much easier to attract partners in the way that you've de-risked the company?
Yeah, that's largely to some extent out of our control to do deals, obviously. So we'll keep advancing the business and the asset forward. And we'll look for opportunities. I mean, we also want to be considered a threat. So if you think about a lot of the agents that are being developed for, certainly in the psychedelic space, where we have our second product, which is, as I mentioned, a redeveloped form of psilocybin, actually, that doesn't appear to have the hallucination problems or liabilities of addiction or abuse potential. There's some pretty big players in that space. Johnson & Johnson is one of them with their ketamine product. I mean, we would like to be a threat, and therefore that is the leverage that we bring to those people in that business. But yeah, I mean, as a smaller company, our goal is to try and use the capital efficiently and get to an exit position for our shareholders, and that may be on a project by project basis or an entire company. So we're very aware that going beyond the phase 2 starts to really cost huge amounts of capital, and so we would like to attract that larger partner earlier on in that cycle. So yeah, we're very aware of that. And again, my guess is that the pharma really like to see some clinical data on compounds. Sometimes they do preclinical deals, but often they like to wait and see clinical data. So we're driving as fast to that point as we can. And again, we're very sensitive to the timelines and the cost to do that. So that's kind of how we're approaching this issue of de-risking it with the larger partner on our part.
That's great. And I'd like to hear a little bit, even just about the business. I know your product's been shown to reduce depression and Parkinson's. Can you just tell us a bit about the results that you've seen so far?
Yeah, so I mean, from a scientific perspective, we want to de-risk it by testing it head to head against things that we know work. So again, we've tested our drug against the original molecule. In this case, istradefylline, which is a Parkinson's drug. We fluorinated it at some very specific places to try and improve its what we call pharmacokinetics. So just basically it stays in the body longer, it's absorbed easier, things like that. And we've had some good data so far in depression. We're as good as that compound is in many ways and beat it on anxiety measurement endpoints. Then we recently announced in our second indication that this drug looks like it reduces fibrosis in the liver. So for people who suffer from fatty liver disease and NASH, it's really the fibrosis that's the danger that people face. And so you can live with a fatty liver for quite a long time. So we tested our drug against, there are no approved therapies right now, but there is an asset in phase 3 called Cenicriviroc. It was bought actually by Allergan, which was ultimately bought, I believe, by Abbott after their phase 2 data. So we tested it. It's the only phase 3 asset focusing on fibrosis, and we handedly beat that molecule in our preclinical tests and showed a very nice reduction in fibrosis. So, we're trying to show that our compounds are as good as, maybe even better than compounds in development. So that should hopefully convince potentially investors and suitors who'd like to maybe take a piece of the company that we're trying to do our science well. We're not afraid to test it head to head. We think we have a very good molecule. And so that's kind of how we also de-risk it as well. We make sure we're as good as or better than the best in class or first in class for whatever that disease is. And again, similarly with our psilocybin-derived asset, we tested it head-to-head against Prozac, which is the most prescribed antidepressant drug right now. Again, beat it very handedly, very quick onset with our molecule with no risk of hallucinations, unlike what you would expect to see with some of the tryptamine type of psychedelic drugs. So yeah, we think we're building a case here, and now it's up to us to go and try and introduce our story to the larger pharmas and start that dialogue with them and see where we could go and move that process along to like I said, a partnership, acquisition, or licensing deal.
This is a question for everyone, but as we're chatting about some of the catalysts that are upcoming with Marvel, I think everyone in the biotech and healthcare space is faced with, everyone wants to know what the next catalyst is. So how do you keep investors attracted to the company and interested rather than kind of just focusing on the business and trading it for the next catalyst that's coming up?
I think having, Tina, for me, it's having the long ball view on where are we taking the business and what are the next sort of metrics for valuation, and whether that, for us, it was moving from quarterly losses to material quarterly profits. Now we're moving into considerable automation of production and 5 to 10x scaling of our capabilities, so we can really drive to a whole logarithmic level of sales growth and profitability. And just sharing that vision consistently, not to say you're never going to have a down quarter or everything's going to be perfect, straight exponential curve upwards, but really communicating that longer term vision for the company, where you have particular capabilities that give you competitive advantage in the area you're working in, whether that's therapeutics, diagnostics, devices, whatever. Where are the spots that you can build, carve out a defensible franchise and keep building that with customers? And Doug's earlier comment about, getting intel from your peers and your customers as well. You've got to have customers to be able to sell something. And I think moving to that discipline sooner rather than later, where you're accountable to customers, really focuses the mind on what you need to do.
Building on that, it's clear and consistent growth. I mean, for us, the catalyst is that growth, and we've had strong growth from the beginning, and building the portfolio is where we continue to deliver strong revenue growth, plus the organic growth in the portfolio. So the catalyst for the investor has got to be, the business development we do, the way we build scale. I mean, that's what produces a strong return. When you have a profitable business, then you're looking to make it stronger, more profitable, better ratios. And so that for us, that's it. And that's why treosulfan is so important, because, if that puts $100 million on the top line at an 80% gross margin, then obviously that creates a really strong return for investors.
Yeah, and I think all of you have multiple indications, commercial products. So it's not, none of these companies are one-trick ponies, and that's the difference between a lot of the biotech companies that you see, where investors just get caught in that trap of investing for the catalyst, whereas you all seem to have multiple milestones and real businesses to follow.
And I think that's probably the basis of the strategy that you're hearing from us on this call today. It does take well over $1 billion in a decade to get a drug approved, and in the Canadian context, you might get one shot on goal, but it's very unlikely for Canadian companies historically to be able to fund 2 ongoing clinical programs in a meaningful way. So you kind of get that, you're all in around a compound. And, I think for all of our businesses, we're all trying to grow revenue. And that's, the way you do that is adding additional products and really being successful at commercializing. So, we look for growth promiscuously across every opportunity in our therapeutic areas. And as we execute and add additional product, that we kind of measure ourselves, not just from revenues, definitely that's the easiest and the most important, but also from the number of products that we're adding and the amount of assets that we have in diligence at any given time, is another real key metric for us internally.
And I applaud your promiscuity, Doug, because that really helps our business.
Yeah.
That's the only time you'll get an endorsement for promiscuity, I think.
Well, just generally kind of talking about not only the healthcare space, but with COVID, everyone's moved online. We've shifted onto Zoom. Investors have access to so many ideas. They're being bombarded with webinars and conferences daily. So how are you competing with all of this access to management and company information, and what sets your companies apart? Mark, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks. It's a very good question. There's a million things that an investor can look at. For us, we are more milestone driven because of the nature of our being pre-revenue. So our goal is to try and hit our milestones, set them out. Again, get to the clinic where, historically where you get your large valuation increases, at least in public companies with biotech, in the biotech space. So, and again, it really is a slow burn, because the only way I think you can do this is to be credible, to try and be, and I like the open and honesty point that was made. I think it was by you, Cameron. Again, you only have so much trust with people, so you don't want to lose that trust. So they're your investors. I mean, they're in some ways they're your partners. So you want to be open and honest with them as much as you can, and just deliver it every day. You go to work and you try and push the ball down the field. And again, for us, we do it we're very respectful of the capital that's been invested in us, and we feel a responsibility to get the compound as far along as we can. So I think it's more about building trust, and I think ultimately, if enough people hear that you're moving the things along the field as you say you are going to, then that builds a reputation, and people like a management team they can trust, and that's how we're approaching this problem. But again, it is very difficult to be a highly visible nanocap without being outrageously promotional, and there's been cases of that. And certainly with COVID, that people have been definitely crossed the line, and there's no coming back from that easily. So I don't want to be there, and hopefully we will build that reputation going forward.
And one thing we found during COVID was like a fundamental shift to more and more patients and over-the-counter customers shifting to online. Online has transitioned every retail environment that it comes across, but it was slow moving in the healthcare space, especially around prescription products that require a strong detail. And I have a number of medical device companies, diagnostic companies have invested in, and that space really slowed down because of COVID, because physicians weren't doing surgeries, hospitals weren't letting industry come into the hospital. Those things all slowed down. But if you think about Ken's product and our product in transplant, patients are going to take their anti-organ rejection drugs. Doesn't matter whether it's COVID or not. It's a lethal condition if they don't. Same thing with glaucoma. Patients don't want to go blind. And if you don't treat your glaucoma, that's where you're going to end up. So the one trend that we were really surprised at was our cost of sales dropped so much during COVID, because clinicians weren't being taken up for lunches. Salespeople weren't driving the same number of hours around their territories. their calls all went online. It was a huge saving. So COVID surprisingly increased revenues, despite us not being in virology, that they increased revenues and decreased, sales costs in a large way.
Maybe you can kind of touch on how your business is impacted as well. And, I know most of your businesses, your products are focused on similar sustainable businesses, I guess.
So was that for me, Tina, or?
Oh, no, I'm for Ken.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, thanks, Tina. Yeah, so our business clearly, like Doug said, mature assets for chronic diseases were still widely used, and people need these drugs. So our revenues for all drugs that were mature continued or grew. The one exception to that was something that was to treat a communicable disease, which obviously dropped dramatically as a result of COVID because we were all socially distancing. The challenge through this period has been growth assets. So launching new products, of which we had 3. So that clearly a challenge for all the reasons that Doug just outlined, that clinicians are not seeing as many patients, not doing as many diagnostic tests, patients not going to the hospitals. And so those all were, drags on our growth, which, we think as COVID goes away, obviously these people are still out there and they need to be treated. They are going to, charge and drive growth with some of these new products. So, we're looking forward to things returning to some level of normality and us returning to growth as a result. But it is nice to have a strong base of business that's remained strong, even in, what's been a very challenging period for the markets in the last couple of years.
I'll jump in just on some of the business side that we've seen. I think, one of the things we found is you can do effective business on Zoom and, Microsoft Teams and whatnot with parties with whom you already have a relationship. You can run projects very effectively. Tougher to do business development with people with whom you've never met, and initiating relationships is more challenging on these mediums than maintaining. So, for example, on our business, we've had great traction with our relationships with international test manufacturers, that's leading diagnostics companies globally, and building up that element of our test controls franchise. But in the newer segment where we're dealing with clinical labs internationally, it's been tougher to get in the door and initiate some of the relationships in that new category. And even our distributors in that category are having difficulty, meeting customers and doing that kind of work.
But that just speaks to the business model, right?
Yeah, well, quite right. And if the ability to introduce new products even in chaotic circumstances is critical, and being able to be the adapt and overcome mentality. If any of, I think, the 4 companies here just sat there, and didn't react effectively to COVID, our businesses would be doing very differently today.
Yeah, for sure. I know we've only got a couple minutes left. We're getting close to the end of the panel, so I want to give each of you a minute just to conclude with some key messages you want to leave investors with. Cameron, why don't we start with you?
I would leave investors with the message, please, have a look and take a deeper dive. There's a lot of information available about our company. We're a real business. We're financially strong. We're growing revenues, margins, and earnings. And to the extent investors want to consider life science investments, please take that deeper dive. And I think you'll be very pleased about what you find about Microbix and what we're doing.
Great. Doug?
Yeah, we're really excited about the next 12 months for our business. We continue to, raise the floor as we add revenues and continue to add more and more products and reduce financial risk. And then, we think with, the orphan indication for Stargardt, that adds a lot of blue sky to the business. That, pricing in orphan diseases, especially for one product like this that are $15,000 a patient, and there's a well over $100 million market opportunity just in the U.S. for that program. So it's kind of that mix of steady business, being in front of customers every day, driving new products through Health Canada and through reimbursement, and continue to grow the base, but also have a measured approach to blue sky as well.
Awesome. Mark?
Thanks, Dana. Yeah, we're being the drug development company of the lot here. This should be a very transformative year for us. We have what I think is a very good model when it comes to de-risking it by using our drug redevelopment play, and again, having an asset that can be used in multiple ways, as well as the second asset. And again, we're driving to the clinic as quickly as possible. So 2022 will be that year. And historically, if companies are able to show efficacy with their compounds, certainly in the US, you're looking at triple digits in terms of hundreds of millions potentially. So we see lots of upside potential for our investors, and we look forward to, as I said, hitting our milestones and getting to the clinic as quickly as we can.
Thanks. And Ken?
Thanks, Tina. Yeah, I guess I would suggest to investors, if you look at our current valuation relative to industry norms, it's significantly undervalued in terms of revenue or historical EBITDA. And then when you add on top of that, the fact that we've got a drug that, hopefully within the next 12 months is going to be approved in the US, that could more than double our revenue, $100 million US revenue potential. That's a significantly strong growth trajectory that historically we've been on.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. I'm excited to keep watching these companies. I think it's important to have some downside protection and be de-risked, particularly in a challenging market. But it's also important to see where the upside is coming from. So it's exciting that you have to be able to offer both of these things for investors.
Thanks, Tina. Good job today.
Thank you, Tina.
Yeah, thanks. Great fun, everybody.
So for full disclosure purposes, I do own shares of Medexus Pharmaceuticals and do not currently own shares of any of the other companies on the panel. Roth Capital also has launched coverage on Medexus Pharmaceuticals as well.